Okay, this is our final session. Just to introduce the topic of the top 4 or 5 issues that our producer members have indicated is an issue which PROs need to deal with is the question of illegal imports. Because as I think has been explained earlier on, there's very little purpose served in the EPR system if we are unable to account for the level of illegal, illicit imports that flood the market, where there's no accounting for the numbers of goods and waste in the society, or being able to incorporate those illicit importers into the PRO system. So it will mess with all our accounting, with all our tracking and tracing and so forth. And in trying to investigate a way of dealing with this problem, I stumbled upon this old soldier in the electronics, not old as in old in age, but as a seasoned warrior in the electronic goods space, Connie Jonker, who I discovered has been doing incredible and important groundbreaking work in dealing with the problem. I know that if he could solve the problem, it would have been solved by now. But he needs partnerships that are a bit difficult to manage, which he will explain in a moment. The second thing worth saying is that Connie's home language, I just overheard now, the language is most familiar in conversing in is Afrikaans. So we must wish him well with his English today. And as somebody who's traveled in the Northern Cape quite a bit, I was told in the Northern Cape, when we speak English, then we are the accused. So, so you're not accused today. Okay, over to you. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I think Jonathan and I first met a couple of years back, just after publication of the Waste Management Act. And at the time, I already worked at Safe House, and I'm going to do this presentation on what Safe House is all about and what the members of Safe House are faced with in the regulatory environment. Now, the regulatory environment, I listened to the first talk, the terminology being used like self-regulation and compliance, and all those are very familiar terms. But in our field, which is product safety, conformity testing, and the regulation of safety of products, and lately the energy efficiency of products, we are dealing with the NRCS. And all our requirements for the compliance of products are very meticulously contained in standards. Those are national standards or compulsory specifications or international standards. Now, my background is I was just telling my neighbor here this afternoon or this morning, I started working for the SABS in 1965. So it's now 60 years. 60 years that I've been in the conformity assessment business. And I worked for the SABS first for 7 years in the chemical paints department. Then I went to university and I came back to the SABS in 1975, mainly in the lighting technology division. But overall, we also had a regulatory section. We had batteries, we had electric motors, we had the whole scope of electrical products, excluding domestic appliances. That was a different department. And so I've been through the development of the SABS and for the collapse of the SABS. And my paper is really about what our experiences were and still are. I've been working for Safe House since 2014. So that's 11 years. And I saw the list of company logos this morning. A few of those are also members of Safehouse. So let's start off. Lately, we've had real concerns about illegal imports. We call illegal imports that are non-compliant products. Okay, by way of introduction, this is a summary of what we are dealing with, and I'm going to read it word for word because it's very important, the terminology and what it says there. The electrotechnical sector once relied on trusted national standards and transparent regulation. But since the split between the SABS and the NRCS in 2008, confidence has eroded. Compliance is now assumed. That's a very important issue. Testing is minimal. Enforcement is inconsistent. Revenue incentives outweigh real safety. Industry has called for reform, yet outdated systems, lack of oversight, and closed-door decisions continue to put consumers and compliant businesses at risk. Now that's a mouthful. The SABS was developed in, I think it was 1948. At the time, it was basically serving the mining industry on products that were used in mines, and over time, national standards were developed together with test methods so that the laboratories could test against those standards. The certification mark, the SABS mark, I think is quite a common and a well-known mark, was based on a Type 5 system. Now, a Type 5 system means that the manufacturer does ongoing quality control. He does periodic testing against the standard, and the SABS would do inspections at the manufacturer and would then also do tests. And then you had a comparison between the test results of the manufacturer and the SABS. All permit holders, mark holders, were obliged to have certain basic test facilities in-house. So what that resulted into is that the staff of the manufacturer were technically trained to do certain tests. The most critical tests could be done in-house. The more expensive tests would then be done by the SABS, and that you had always this engagement between the certifier and the permit holder. Okay, the mandate of SABS in the old Standard Act was development of standards, product testing, product certification, management systems, ISO 9000 and 14000 and so on, and they did regulation of compulsory specification. The first compulsory specification, Government Notice 466, mainly covered domestic appliances, the whole scope of domestic appliances, but also including light fittings. It said household appliances and light fittings. Now, there was a different department for appliances, which still is a different department, and light fittings was in the electrical engineering. Now, because the SABS had test laboratories, the regulatory model was supported by regular surveillance tests. So testing could be done on every product that was covered by a compulsory spec. Then the SABS was restructured, and the regulatory department was put into the NRCS, the National Regulator for Specifications, and the remaining was left with the SABS. So the SABS was left with standards development, product testing, product certification, and management systems. Now, as soon after the NRCS was formed, regulation R999, that was a regulation that prevented manufacturers from paying both compulsory levies and permit fees. So all permit holders were exempted from the levies. So they only had to pay the permit fee, and obviously the certification scheme was much more expensive because they had to maintain in-house laboratories and so on. But it actually gave them credibility in the marketplace. When the NRCS was formed, that government notice was cancelled, so everybody had to pay levies, which resulted in more than 80% of the permit holders cancelling their permits and just go for the levy system. They could not afford both. Now, what has happened after 2008? First of all, the NRCS needed to be financially viable. So they captured most of the work that used to be under the product certification scheme. So all those permit holders now had to pay levies. And they minimized on testing. Now, that information is not readily available, but every year, all government departments have to do an annual report. And if you go through the annual reports of the NRCS from 2008, they allocated 1.3% of their budget to product testing and 76% to salaries. So they have an inspectorate of inspectors that are actually now take over the testing. There's no surveillance testing conducted. Now, if you get a cable to inspect, an inspector, even if he's the best expert, he doesn't know whether the product complies or not. Lately, we've seen many cables and flexible cords being imported with aluminium, copper-coated aluminium conductors instead of copper conductors. Now, an inspector can't see that. You need to do tests. Flammability has to be tested. Electric shock has to be tested. So all the critical safety requirements of all those products, right through from appliances, plugs and sockets, cables, light fittings, lamps, need to be tested. Okay, border control. So the way to enforce the regulation is that companies that import consignments without having a letter of authority from the NRCS are placed under embargo. If they cannot supply the proof of compliance, the consignment can be sent back to source or it can be destroyed. If we look at the letterheads of the NRCS, then there's a caption at the bottom which says protecting health, safety, the environment, and the last bit, and ensuring fair trade. Now that last bit I can prove to you is not the truth. There's few questions to be asked. Can NRCS LOAs be trusted as proof of compliance? And is the policy of one test and one LOA still applied? When the NRCS was formed, they defined proof of compliance that for each type and model of product, a type test report had to be issued to the NRCS, and they will evaluate the test report, and based on the test report, issue a letter of authority. That LOA, by virtue of the Act, needs to be done for each model and type. Now you can imagine how many model and types of products are there. When you read the international reports of ISO Certico, ISO is the International Standards Organization. In the electrical sectors, IEC, which is the International Electrotechnical Committee or Commission. They draw up the electrical specification, IEC specification. ISO is more for management systems and mechanical. Now they had a whole report which actually describes the different types of certification models. And they categorized those models, type 1, type 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and each one was then described by the advantages and the disadvantages and the activities taking place in those models. Now, type 1 is basically a test report from an accredited lab, and the manufacturer can claim compliance based on that once-off test report. Now, what does that say? Type testing forms the basis, an ineluctable element, and Jonathan, I assume you know what ineluctable means. It's it's an inevitable part of any certification scheme is a type test report. You start off with a type test report to see whether your design and everything complies. Type testing gives evidence only about a particular item made at a particular moment in time. Now, when you have been working in a laboratory and you have an accredited laboratory, each test report must state that that test report is only applicable to the sample that was tested and does not ensure compliance of future production. It says, of all types of certification methods, type testing alone allows of no declaration or claim with regard to future production, and it would not justify such inferences. So when you have a type test report, you cannot claim that your production will comply, because the type test report can easily be done on a prototype or a specially prepared sample. The test lab does not know where that sample comes from. Now, that is the biggest flaw in the entire regulatory system, that based on a type test report, which is evaluated by somebody in an office without even seeing the product itself, it's a document from a laboratory, and they say, okay, you can sell this for 3 years. And if after 3 years you can claim that nothing has changed in the model, they extend LOA for another 2 years. So you can have 5 years based on a test report. And it may be a test report on a prototype. So nobody will send a test sample for testing to a laboratory if he doesn't make sure that everything that he can see or can determine would comply. We often found at SABS, when you get a non-compliance, one of the clauses did not comply, then you return it to the supplier and they fix it, and then they get a test report. It doesn't say that that change was also in the production line. You know nothing about the production line. Okay, then it says inferences of this nature can only be sustained if the system that incorporates type testing includes some additional evidence or data which provide a credible link between the type test and subsequent production. That is quality control and periodic testing. So if you make cables, you have to do quality control continually, every day, because if your drawing of copper runs too fast, the wire gets too thin. So you don't have the correct core size and resistance. So quality control is an ongoing activity. Periodic testing is an ongoing activity depending on the type of product. In the Luminaire specification or Luminaire standard, it says in the introduction, Compliance of the type test sample does not ensure compliance with the whole production of a manufacturer. Clear as compliance for production is a responsibility of the manufacturer and may include routine tests and quality assurance in addition to type testing. So it's very clear. Now we get to the LOA. I don't know whether you have all seen an LOA before, and I take the liberty to take an actual LOA which was handed to us recently in the market, and this covers, I did it in 2 pages, this covers chord extension sets. Now if you look at it, it looks all very fine, then that highlighted tariff heading on the left. Now you all know what is a chord extension sets, we use them every day. That tariff heading is for chord sets, plugs and sockets rated more than 1000 volt. And for that tariff heading, there's no duty payable. It's free of import duties. Now, why would the NRCS put that tariff heading on a product which is not 1000 volt and above? It's for 250 volt or 240. So there's something fishy. Either incompetence or maybe deliberate. Who knows? Then the standard there, the applicable standard, it says IEC 60884-1. The local compulsory specification is VC 8029, and that includes requirements for plugs and sockets, which is SANS 164. So we have in this country a national deviation from 60884. 60884 does not cover our 3-pin plug. So based on the test report against 60884, that LOA was issued. Now we come to the next bit. If a test report covers all those models, I can't see any accredited lab issuing a test report for 31 models, but the highlighted one, if you look at the bottom, asterisk means a blank or an alphanumeric. So each of those asterisks could be a 0 to 9. And if you just calculate the combination, that is 100,000. Only that one code is 100,000 models. So this actually is a blanco check for that particular importer, and he can sell anything as long as it has one of this YM coding on it. And for that he gets a 3-year permission to sell in the country. Now how does it affect the waste management system? If it is aluminium conductor, those things are not flexible, they don't last. So you have failures, much more failures. You have an increase of waste that actually accumulates. Bye, Patrick. So it affects the whole chain right to the time of disposal. Okay, then the question is, why has the NRCS failed in its mandate? This type test report and the LOA that I explained to you just now is a clear indication that they cannot control this. But apart from that, the industry cannot comply with the regulation. They cannot afford having a LOA and a type test report for each and every model. So that maybe is the reason why the NRCS has resorted in this kind of thing where they cover thousands of models. I've seen another one on table lamps, and I calculated 1.5 million models that LOA covers. So this is a common thing. It's not the one-off. There's more than that. So the whole letter of authority cannot work. The industry cannot comply with it. And then what can suppliers do? They try to sneak as many models into a type test report so that they can get an LOA to legally sell the product on the market. As I said, the NRC model is in a type 1B certification scheme and is of the lowest level of confidence that there is. But the next item, and I think that was why the Safe House Association was originally formed, is that the NRCS does not recognize Type 5 product certification as proof of compliance. So if you are a permit holder, you have all the quality controls in place, you do your testing regularly, periodically. The NRCS says, sorry, you have to get a type test report for each and every model. Now, there are sectors of the industry that actually refuse to follow the NRCS rules. They don't pay the levies, they just refuse. But that's all fine if you are not an importer, because it's difficult to stop you. If you're an importer, they stop your consignment and they destroy it. Right, then, international best practice. The NRCS often claims that they follow international best practice in their regulatory model. Now, I've seen publications, international publications, which claims the MVE model. And I've heard that in your previous talks. MVE, monitor, verify, and enforce. Now, if you monitor, you can do it inspection. You can say, okay, that guy is selling this product, therefore he is subject to levies, and we just have to keep a tab on it. But verify is to do market surveillance testing. Market surveillance testing, as I indicated, 1.3% of the budget they spent on testing. What is the result? The SABS labs are closing down. You must have heard in the news that the SABS is under administration and under investigation. They have laid off most of their senior technical staff. When I left in 2002, there were about 2,000 staff members at SABS, of which were 1,200 technical. There are just over 100 technical people left. Right, then it says that NRCS does no verification or market surveillance testing. It relies totally on physical inspections. So they have a whole team of inspectors that inspect products. Now, as I told you, you can't inspect whether a mobile phone complies, or whether a washing machine energy efficiency, or whether a lamp has the output that it's supposed to have. Now, Safe House was formed to fight the battle for acceptance of Type 5 certification. And Safe House also started doing market evaluation, samples from the market, and then having them tested at Safe House's expense at an accredited lab, and reporting that to the NRCS to say, this product does not comply, you have to stop the sale. They just ignore. If you ask them, what has happened to this complaint that was registered, you get a standard letter. We are not obliged to report back to you due to the confidentiality clause of the NRCS Act. So it's all confidential, you don't get a feedback. The Act makes provision for public disclosure. It says, the CEO can disclose, name and shame, a product if it's in the interest of the safety of the consumer. I asked the previous CEO, I said, why don't you do enclosure? He says, no, he's not allowed to. I said, but the Act says. And the Act actually says, in spite of the confidentiality clause, the CEO may do disclosure of non-compliances. I said that the Safe House Association was formed basically to raise concerns and issues with the NRCS so that there's a better working relationship and better reliability on products in the market for the safety of the public and for the environment. And I'm just giving you what Safe House is all about. And maybe you could keep that in mind to have your PROs maybe in a similar association. Okay, Safe House is a voluntary group of electrical industry stalwarts, technical experts and leaders of our respective businesses and fields. We believe it's our civic and commercial duty to protect our industry and fellow South Africans from nefarious suppliers of unsafe electrical products and services. So it's very clear. We work tirelessly to eradicate dangerous products from the market, to make electrical safety information understandable and accessible, and to hold one another and our industry to the highest standards of excellence. So it's a voluntary association. Members pay a membership fee, and with that membership, we create a platform to negotiate and collaborate with the authorities, to educate our members, to be on technical committees where specifications are developed, and that kind of activity. What is our purpose is to protect lives and livelihoods. System designed to protect the South African consumers and producers of electrical goods and services have failed. As leaders within our field, we are equipped with the tools, the experience, and the power to reform this reality. Members of our industry deserve to operate within a fair business environment, and their customers deserve to go home with products that are reliable and safe. And we are on a quest to ensure electrical compliance is commonplace in South Africa. Our mandate is to protect and grow our members' market share, reclaiming shame to non-compliant products, to protect consumers from preventable loss, and our vision is to eradicate non-compliances and that compliances becomes the norm. We facilitate industry in the capacity to self-regulate. Now, in the self-regulation environment, there is an international standard, which is ISO 17050, which is the self-declaration of compliance. So it has a whole list of requirements for every company that actually conforms to 17050. You need a technical file where you have your test report, your quality controls, your information, any complaints that you get on the product. It's an international document which gives guidance to SDOC, Self-Declaration of Compliance. And you may be familiar with the CE mark, which appears on products. That is a self-declaration of compliance model which is widely used in the European Union, but many other countries like Australia also use SDOC in their regulatory processes. Eradicating non-compliant suppliers from the landscape, that is a very tall order. It's difficult to do. Educating businesses and consumers about safe products. That's an ongoing thing that Safe House does. We are putting articles on LinkedIn. We send out monthly mailers on different topics. If you go on the Safe House website, you will see all the guides that we publish. So we do a lot of marketing on regulation and product compliance. What is our code of conduct? To comply with South African legislation, regulations, specifications, standards, and other such requirements applicable to products supplied. To sell only products that are safe and hazard-free and which will not cause death or injury of persons or harm to the environment if used for the purposes they were designed for and in the prescribed manner. To comply with the requirements of the Consumer Protection Act insofar as the safety of products are concerned. And that text in blue is a peer review system that we have applied, where our members that sign the Constitution and the Code of Conduct undertake to put in corrective action in the event when non-compliant products are detected. So we use our members to check each other. So if one of our members has a suspect product, they notify the Safe House management anonymously. We buy the product from marketplace. We send the product for testing to a test laboratory, an accredited test laboratory. If we get that report back, we go to the transgressor and we say, look, we found your product non-compliant. What is your corrective action? They are obliged to give us the corrective action, and depending on the severity of the non-compliance, to either recall the product or notify or rectify or whatever is applicable. It remains anonymous so that our members are free to actually check each other, because that is part of business. You have to see what your competitor is doing. If the transgressor does not follow the code of conduct, then he risks being cancelled from membership. And we had a few cases where we had to actually just cancel their membership. But then we also raised a complaint with NRCS. Now, over the past years, we have formally raised more than 100 complaints with the NRCS with proof of non-compliance from an accredited test laboratory. And I can tell you what has happened with that. Zero. To put you into the picture, what is the cost of testing? The most basic table lamp, you talk about 15,000 Rand. For a cord extension set, I think it's about 50,000, 60,000 Rand. For a sample of LED lamps, performance and safety, 100,000 Rand. For a circuit breaker, 250,000. That's the kind of costs that we incur. Okay, so we have limited capacity. Now, what happens overseas? Overseas, they have name and shame. They have a website. In the UK, they have a website which is called Electrical Safety First. And if you go into that website, Electrical Safety First, you will see over the years all the models that were found not to comply, model number, manufacturer, and they've categorized it in domestic appliances, lighting, everything. You can see that over the years what is covered there. That is actually needed in South Africa so that the public can see this is a product, that's the brand name, don't buy it. The NRCS, in its disclosure of non-compliance, that was the original intention. And it doesn't happen. Now, one of the actions that Safe House has been considering is to do just that, to name and shame. But obviously that results in legal action and all those things. And then they say, but I've got an LOA. It's been approved by the NRCS. Okay, generally we strive towards design and manufacture processes that are ethical, professional, and so on. What do we do for our members? They get discounted rates on professional testing and advice services with in-house technical support. So we have certain arrangement with some of the test lab to give a preferential rate for testing. Self-regulation guidance, we facilitate every aspect of your journey to self-regulate. Problem solving, we work with industry bodies to lobby government to address issues that affect the prosperity of our members' organization. And that is the section 3 that I've been involved in for the last 10 odd years. Exposure, promotion of our brand to the industry and our customer bases, which include end consumers, contractors, developers, and insurance. Industry surveillance, we survey industry on behalf and act as your contact point for any safety. So we also, when we get complaints even from non-member products, we will also investigate that. Like this LOA that we have seen here, that is a range of products that we actually had tested. I think 2 years ago we sampled 13 different cord extension sets from the market. There was only one compliant. That's the kind of level of non-compliance that we get. We have developed a safety mark which our users may use on their packaging to indicate that they are members of Safehouse and that they are committed to sell compliant product. This is a safety mark. It can be used in different formats, with the subscript or without the subscript. It's a choice of our member. Industry collaboration. Now, as I said, the Safehouse was originally formed to try to get Type 5 certification again recognized, because it's far superior to the present LOA type approval system. Out of desperation, we did not make any headway with the NRCS. We tried to get to see the CEO of the NRCS. That didn't materialize. Then we went to DTIC. They were also reluctant to accommodate a delegation from Safehouse. And eventually we thought, okay, maybe OTA. You all know OTA, the tollgate people. We went to OTA, Wayne Duvernay. She said, Wayne, we have this problem. We have compulsory specifications, people pay levies, and nothing happens. He says, but yes, that is abuse of tax money. They will take up the matter, and we formed a committee together with BUSA, Business Unity South Africa, and we had 13 member organizations forming part of this committee, of which the main drivers were Safehouse and SADA, that is the South African Domestic Appliances Association, because the scope of Safehouse is more in the consumer goods. It's not as much in the domestic appliances field. So the two associations together, SADA and Safehouse, we were actually fairly vocal in these working groups. We eventually got regular meetings with the NRCS management of the electrotechnical division. So we had, say, at least every 2 months, we had meetings to discuss a whole lot of issues that the industry has raised. After 2 years, we managed to put an action plan together, which would then, a task team would be formed of industry representatives and NRCS representatives to deal with all the various issues so that we get a structured way of dealing with it. I'm going to skip those for the time being, but this was the structure. So after 2 years of collaboration with the NRCS, we formed this structure, which then would take the actions individually by different task teams from industry and NRCS together. The first 2 years of meetings was always held with a dual chairmanship, one from the NRCS and one from the working group. And we formulate this whole plan together. And it was supposed to start in the beginning of 2024. And I can tell you it is quite extensive. Promote innovation and regulatory efficiency. Identifies opportunities, SDOCs, Suppliers Declaration of Conformity, pilot pre-planning, stakeholder engagement, SDOC piloting. This new general service LAMP specification was an ideal project where SDOC could be applied because it's not a safety risk really. In my 50, 60 years, I've only known of one person being electrocuted because of a lamp. It's a low-risk product because you put the lamp in your luminaire and it sits there for a couple of thousand hours. When you switch off the light and you replace your lamp, it's so you're not exposed to the lamp itself. So that was an ideal pilot project. Reduce average time for LOA approvals. Now, an LOA approval, initially it took about a week when the NRCS was formed. Lately, it took 120 days. And that has been worked down to 90 days. So you can get a report evaluated and an LOA issued in 90 days. Now, that is a severe burden on industry. You can't wait for 90 days when you want to import stuff. Improve market surveillance capabilities. Explore synergies between the NRCS and the industry. National product testing facilities. Now, the SABS is at such a low stage with hardly any staff. They can't do what they are supposed to be doing. So that is a very serious issue. Improve public awareness. That is disclosure of non-compliances, warning people, alerting them to non-compliance and unsafe products. Doesn't happen. Then implement SCCs. Now, unfortunately, my colleague Patrick Stuckey has left. SCC is a specialist consultative committee. And the Act makes provision for specialist consultative committee to create a forum where the industry can raise concerns that then needs to be discussed between industry and the NRCS. In 2012, they agreed to form such a committee. Even set dates that we would meet. It never happened. So last year, after a lot of pressure of this BUSA Auto Working Group on the SEC, they created an SEC. And the terms of reference were defined. I was nominated by Safehouse, and a colleague of mine also nominated by Safehouse, and a couple of other industry nominations were there. And we had our first meeting. And the first meeting says, well, look, we have these terms of reference, and there's a confidentiality clause. You have to sign a confidentiality statement that you will not release any information that is discussed. You're also not allowed to discuss certain technical topics with other people. I said, well, then I have a conflict of interest. My job is to talk about the issues that the industry has. And I resigned from that meeting. Okay, they were happy for me resigning, I think. That meeting was formed, the first meeting was held in December last year with the intention to meet regularly on issues that were very pertinent. They haven't had a meeting since. So it's now, how many months? 6, 7 months haven't met. That's the SEC. Then transparency and consultative development. I was listening, and I'm actually very happy that the department and the industry talk a lot about collaboration. And I'll tell you what has happened in the NRCS. There is absolutely no collaboration. Sitting in meetings and having debates about technical matters, the NRCS says, well, we've heard you, but we make the decision. So they can go right against what was discussed and ignore what was discussed and what was proposed. Their definition of consulting is far away from reaching consensus. We even had a meeting, and I think Alex may have been there. It is about the scope of the new luminaire specification, which I mentioned. And there were 3 proposed scopes by the NRCS. And we debated those 3 scopes. What should be covered? What should be excluded? And eventually they said, okay, you can state your preference, but we are not allowed to reach a consensus. It's a consultative. They will decide. So eventually we decided on gentlemen's terms to select one of the scopes that suited us best. A year later, I am in a meeting on lamps, industry readiness of the lamps, and they say, look, there are only those compulsory specifications that relate to lighting products, and VC 9012 for luminaires was still born in 2014. Now that is a specification project that was started in 2012, and it has not been completed as of today. And that's where the scope debate was about. In 2019, we decided on the scope, and that would then be submitted to the DTIC for publication in the Government Gazette. When we inquired about this, they had changed the scope from what was agreed in the committee. That is what consultation is. If you're not prepared to consult in good faith. Now, fortunately, yes, you are on the right wicket. Consultation and collaboration is the most important part of what you do. Maybe you have seen some billboards. There was a billboard at Menlyn with a plug and socket burning. There was a plug and extension cord burning, and it killed a little kid of 2 years old. And the NRCS has done nothing about it. And then we found there's an organization by the name of Tax Justice South Africa. And they take up certain projects, various projects on tobacco industry, pharmaceuticals, all the controversial issues. And they approached Safehouse and other industry members to get support so that they could start advertising and addressing those issues with the NRCS. And Safehouse and many others supported them with evidence of complaints issued to the NRCS and so on. And they put up a billboard. They even took videos. They were on ETV on particular this matter. And they had interviews and videos taken at the NRCS. They took me on a video and other people from the industry. And eventually, the leader of that organization is well known with government officials. And he eventually managed to arrange a meeting with the Deputy Minister of the DTIC, which we never were able to get since 2014. So this was the industry position that we had an online meeting with the minister, and those are the aspects that we raised with the minister. And you can see Safehouse and SADA were the main drivers of this. Industry needs a strong market regulation and ongoing surveillance. There's no doubt about it. There is a room, it's desperately a desperate activity that we have a strong regulatory environment that does their job. Absence of regulation is a disaster. No response on industry complaints, I've explained that to you. We need a ombudsman function. When you get a stoppage of your consignment and it's an invalid stoppage, there needs to be somebody that can take up your case. Now, the general ombudsman does not take it up because the NRCS is the regulator. They argue the regulator is supposed to deal with issues that apply to the regulator. Now you've had the situation, the same person that signs the embargo must now be approached to lift the embargo. And I've had meetings on rechargeable torches where consignments of millions of rands have been stopped and torches are not covered by any compulsory specification. I even went as far as approaching the IEC to a feedback, and they agree with us, but the NRCS doesn't budge. Monitoring verification, we've discussed it. They do administration, they don't do regulation. And then the consultative process is taken to the extreme. The way forward strongly promotes self-compliance, promotes Safehouse membership and product branding. That's the only way that the public can see whether a product is reliable or not. At the moment, there's no SABS mark, there's no mark whatsoever. Public disclosure of non-compliances and ongoing liaison with the NRCS. It's time for a transparent, risk-based model that restores trust and protects life. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Connie. So thank you very much, Connie, for that presentation. I think we all learned a lot about the issues related, I'm sure especially from yours. Well, you know this stuff already, but we think we have a deeper understanding of the kind of thing you're confronting, you know. Given the time, because we've gone slightly beyond our scheduled time, I think we should end off now on the understanding that we will circulate, if with your permission, this presentation to everybody who registered. And also what we'll do is we'll follow up with a dedicated meeting with Safehouse, with our producer members, to continue the discussion as to how we can support you in developing this attempt at stopping illegal imports. So if we can leave it at that for now, if everybody's happy, and just allow me to make some concluding remarks and then we can end. The intention now is to break for final tea, and then just to whoever's met each other, wants to network, develop, share phone numbers and so forth, to do so. So it's late in the day, we've had a very, very, I think, successful day and intensive day. So a lot of issues have been dealt with, and our mental capacity to process information has been stretched to the max, you know. So I'm not going to belabor your thought processes with any more information. By way of conclusion, I would like to make 5 quick thank yous. Firstly, to the R2E2 and ARO team, who pulled this off, sharing resources, contributing financially, and putting your energy in. It's a very small team, and we pulled it off, so well done, guys. Thank you very much. Then to the University of Johannesburg, to Dottie and others. Dottie, we're waving at you. Thanks for everything, for providing a home for us to convene. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your support. And apologies if we didn't reply to your emails on time. So Then to you who've come and made the time to attend, I think that's the most important thank you. Thank you for making the time to attend. I know it's a deviation from your day-to-day activities, collecting and making money, your day-to-day activities, running your businesses, but we sometimes have to step back, look at the big picture, and get back into work at a higher level. So these moments of pause and reflection are important. So I genuinely thank you for making the time to attend. And then lastly, to the DFFE, particularly the DDG, for giving the time to actually think through the questions we put to her and respond. We haven't solved the problems, but we have created something very important, which Connie has referred to, and that is an atmosphere of collaboration and consultation. Thank goodness we have a department that is open to engagement and the sharing of ideas, because we know from what you've said that that isn't always the experience. So I have faith that we've got that kind of line of communication and connection through which we will be able to find solutions going forward. So thanks very much for attending, and we look forward to ongoing engagement. That's it. Thank you very much.